Following the merger of the United Soccer Association and the National Professional Soccer League into the NASL following their respective 1967 season, soccer in America finally seemed poised to set up a long-term professional league in the country, and with the massive spike in popularity in the 1970s, some of the biggest names in the world decided to hone their craft in the land of the free. Leaving no doubt this was the first truly successful professional soccer league in America. But there's always one question I have whenever I look back at this time period. If the NASL was so great, what happened? On one side, you had the National Professional Soccer League, or NPSL, described as a wild league since it had no affiliation with FIFA, and then you had the United Soccer Association, which had a more secure future and structure as far as the two leagues were concerned. Now, to understand how the USA came to be as an organization, you really need to know a few names that got the league off the ground. Mainly, what I'm going to refer to as the Big Three: Steve Stavro, Lamar Hunt, and Jack Kent Cook. Steve was born Manoli Stavros Šoldas. He was a Canadian businessman of Macedonian descent, primarily known as a grocery store magnate and thoroughbred racehorse owner. He was also viewed as a philanthropist among the people who knew him and was actually owner of a few sports teams. Mainly, he was known for turning Nob Hill Farms into one of Canada's largest grocery store chains at the time. Also heavily involved with the sports scene in Canada, in 1961 he would go on to help found the Eastern Canada Professional Soccer League, which would actually go on to operate from 1961 to 1966, which, despite a short run, actually had an effect on the international rules set by FIFA. Since the league would run during the summer, many European players would wind up spending their summers playing in Canada just to return to European teams in the fall. Ultimately, FIFA would rule players are not allowed to play for a separate club without a proper transfer. He would eventually go on to own two of Toronto's biggest sports teams in the Toronto Raptors from the NBA and the Toronto Maple Leafs from the NHL. And in 1966, he would help found the aforementioned United Soccer Association, as well as entering a Toronto-based team to the league named Toronto City. Lamar Hunt is a name that needs little introduction to those well-educated fans about soccer in America, and even those who could care less about soccer are probably familiar with Lamar. Lamar was mainly known for his massive contributions and involvement in American sport. His achievements included the following. He was a principal founder of the American Football League, a former rival league to the NFL that would go on to merge and become the league as we know it today, the NASL, which we're talking about today, the co-founder of the World Championship Tennis, which ran from 1968 to 1990, founder and owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, an NFL franchise, founder and owner of the Kansas City Wizards, a future MLS franchise, and would also go on to own the Columbus Crew and FC Dallas in the MLS. He also helped fund and establish theme parks and is probably most famously known today for being the name behind the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup, the oldest running soccer competition in America. He's honestly going to get his own video in the future, so I'm just going to stop with the surface details. Last but not least would finally be Mr. Jack Kent Cook. Like his compatriots, Jack was a successful businessman and turned it into successful stints in sports. Initially being involved in sales in his native Canada, Cook would do well for himself partnering with radio stations and a few newspapers in his native country. Eventually, he would prove unsuccessful in attempting to start a professional baseball team in Toronto, as well as a failed deal to own a TV studio. Cook found his way down south in the land of opportunity.
Hello. You boys like Mexico? Yeah!
No, not that far south. While in America, Cook would go on to own a sports business empire. His portfolio would include ownership of the Washington Redskins, now known as the Washington Commanders, an NFL franchise, the Los Angeles Lakers. If I need to introduce the Lakers to you guys, I don't know what we're doing here, alright? I don't care what sport you watch, you know who the fuck the Lakers are. The Los Angeles Wolves, a former team from the United Soccer Association, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, not the hockey team, but a baseball team playing in what is the now defunct International Baseball League, which I think I found another series to do, saying that out loud. He would also help develop the Forum in California and what is now known as Commanders Field in Maryland. Under his ownership, the Lakers would wind up winning the 1972 finals, and Washington would win Super Bowls in 1982, 87, and 1991. Needless to say, the USA had some real heavy hitters running the show. Originally beginning as the North American Soccer League in 1966, Shortly after, a new rival league named the National Professional Soccer League would arrive, which prompted a name change to the United Soccer Association. Like I mentioned in the previous video, this league would be made up of sister teams in the United Soccer Association based around established clubs around the world, including partnerships like Washington and Aberdeen, Vancouver Sunderland, and Chicago Cagliari. Initially expected to start in 1968, the NPSL's announcement that they were ready to launch in 1967 forced the United Soccer Association to launch with teams made up entirely of players from the bigger clubs. With plans to establish homegrown talent in the future, ultimately this league would only play for 1 year before merging into the NASL, with the LA Wolves winning the championship after an own goal from Washington Whips defender Ali Suwan in the start of the golden goal extra time to give LA the win 6-5. The other major player in this merger was the National Professional Soccer League. Unlike the USA, however, this league did not share the level of polish and support, namely from a little group named FIFA. Initially started as the North American Professional Soccer League, the NAPSL was one of 3 organizations planning on building a league between America and Canada, and they would actually go on to merge with the other small organizations pushing for the same goal early on, known as the National Soccer League. Upon the merger, the league would be renamed to the National Professional Soccer League, or NPSL. The group behind founding the NPSL would be led behind Bill Cox and Bob Herman, with Bill having a significant amount more experience in sports and team leagues than his compatriot. Being the more straight businessman of the two, Bob Herman had a much simpler path to follow to the league. A graduate of Princeton University, Herman would go on to make his money in packaging and container sales. Don't tell me this dude got rich off of selling Ziploc containers? What? Eventually becoming one of the biggest takeout container manufacturers in the world. Being heavily involved in the community made him well liked in St. Louis, Missouri, where he would go help found fairs, nonprofits, and would be named 1996 Man of the Year by the St. Louis Variety Club. His contributions to the city would not stop on the civic and political front, however, as he would help form the NPSL as well as the St. Louis's own team, the St. Louis Stars. Herman would be remembered fondly in the end, as his efforts saw the NPSL create the Herman Trophy given to the best male and female college players in the country, as well as having a stadium named after him and ultimately being inducted in the National Hall of Fame in 2012. Also, side note, he married the daughter of August Anheuser-Busch Jr. Yeah, that Anheuser-Busch, the beer company. I'm pretty sure he did well for himself. Good job, bro.
City boy! City boy!
Not to try and overshadow Mr. Herman, but Bill Cox had the much more impressive sports resumes between the two. A graduate of Yale, he would go on to make his money initially in the lumber trade after a stint in banking. I don't know how those connect, but whatever. After starting his own lumber brokerage, his first journey into sports would actually be into other kind of football. You know, the one with the helmets and stuff. He would go on to become the owner of the New York Yankees, not the baseball team. This was a team in the third iteration of the American Football League, also known as the AFL-3, not to be confused with prior attempts. Did we really just decide to come up with 20 team names as a country and just stick with those? What are we doing here? Why do we reuse so many? Whatever, I'm going on a freaking rant now. Eventually going on to serve as president of said league, highlighted by signing Heisman Trophy winner Tom Harmon. This would all come to an end, however, with the outbreak of World War II, causing most of the league's players to get drafted, causing a suspension of the league that would never return. Following this in 1943, Cox would take advantage of the opportunity to own the Philadelphia Phillies in the MLB. I really encourage people to research this, because this is one of the craziest things I found, and I feel like this might deserve its own video. After this stint in MLB that ended in a gambling controversy on November 23, 1943, he was also given a lifetime ban. It wouldn't be until 1960 that Cox would become a figure in the sports world again, when he would help a group of entrepreneurs in founding Whatever, we'll roll with it. In founding the International Soccer League, a yearly competition held in America during the summer. The competition consisted of various teams from foreign nations, including an all-star style team of American players. This competition would run until 1966, with multiple cities hosting games. It's almost like they're running their own World Cup here. Heading into 1967, Cox, along with a few other investors, including Herman, would go on to form the NPSL in 10 inaugural cities. This league would get off to a shaky start to match Cox's reputation, as the league would initially refuse to pay the $25,000 sanctioning fee to the United States Soccer Federation, or the USSFA, which would actually lead to FIFA as branding them as an outlaw league. Despite that, they somehow managed to secure a TV deal with CBS for that initial 1967 season. towards the tail end of 1967, the NPSL had lost its TV deal after some atrocious viewership numbers, and the United Soccer Association was really only seen as off-season training by the bigger clubs, so they would not really field their best team. As a result, FIFA requested the two join up and become one league, and for the second time in history, America had a single major professional soccer league, the NASL. Unfortunately, those early years would really just be the same old song for a league in the United States. A lack of familiar faces, especially homegrown ones, high salaries for foreign players, rental costs for major stadiums, and waning attendance numbers really resulted in every team failing to make any profit over the first year. Side effects of this would also be investors pulling out of the project after just one season. CBS terminated a TV contract at the end of the first year, and all but 5 teams would end up folding. This coming after victories against Pele and Santos and the reigning English champions Manchester City. The next year, the league would be based out of a basement of Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, and a 16-game season was planned to be played between the 5 surviving teams. Kansas City would be declared champions based on total points, and at the conclusion of the season, Baltimore Bays would announce the folding of the team, and it seemed like the NASL was about to go away just as fast as it showed up. Luckily for the NASL, there was still another semi-pro league operating that had its name closely tied with professional soccer in the country heading back to the 1920s. I'm talking about a new version of one half of the original Soccer Wars, the ASL. The ASL had been quietly operating at a mostly regional level, but it still had some established teams, and it would be 2 of these teams, the Rochester Lancers and the Washington Darts, that would actually be invited to join the NASL. Despite almost 40 years of semi-pro soccer, both these teams would go on to be the 2 best teams in the league immediately. Meeting each other in the next year's final, where Rochester would beat Washington in a 2-game final in 1970, and this would actually prove to be the spark that the NASL would need to explode in popularity in years to come. The next year, the NASL would expand by adding 3 teams, 2 based in Canada, the Toronto Metros and the Montreal Olympique. The last team added this year would just happen to become one of the league's most iconic, the New York Cosmos. NASL top brass quickly realized the country wasn't really interested in soccer at this moment. They would decide to make some drastic rule changes to the core gameplay in an attempt to attract more viewership and fan interest, since a lot of people in America at the time still weren't really knowledgeable in this game. Ultimately, these changes helped produce some interesting results, including 1971 champions Dallas Tornado playing Rochester Lancers after a 173-minute game.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad!
Some of the more interesting rule changes included the following. The game clock would count down from 90 to 0 instead of counting towards 90 like in a traditional match. In 1972, they added a marker at the 35-yard line from the goal to determine offside calls instead of a midfield line. Players could not be offside if they weren't past the line, and the rule had a blessing from FIFA until 1982. In 1974, penalty shootouts were added to decide the games ending in a draw, and by 1977 they had switched over to the infamous 35-yard run-up penalties, or the hockey penalties as I like to call them. If you're not familiar with this, just look at this next clip.
The linesman who disallowed that apparently good Washington goal with a few minutes to go in regular time.
And now we got a problem with the clock. It was at 5. Now it's down to 0. Now it's back to 5. Shall we give it a shot, Carlos?
I think you'll see Carlos do the same thing that we've just been describing. I think he will flick the ball up in the air, and this will give Bill Irwin then has to decide whether to come out or stay put.
Okay. Well, keeping it on the ground so far. Still on the ground. The shot. He missed it.
They would also carry over to the NPSL point system of 6 per win and 3 per draw, with bonus points for every goal you scored in a game up to your first 3 goals in the game. In 1974, with the penalty shootouts being added, the points for a win would drop to 1 per win from 1975 to 76. But then they would be changed back to 6 points per win from 77 to 1980, and then go back down to 4 points from 1981 to 84. You want to say hi to people? Look, it's a appearance by the gravy baby. Look at him. Look at this boy. Look at him. Look at him. Isn't he a good boy? Isn't he a good boy? Okay. Say what you will about the rule changes. The thing is, they kind of worked. Many players in the early 70s tended to have other jobs outside of the season, which wasn't too uncommon with pro athletes of that era, as this was really before sports salaries really took off. September 3rd, 1973 would be one of the most important days for the league, and as a result, the future of the game as a whole in this country, as this was the day Sports Illustrated would have Philadelphia Adams keeper Bob Rigby front and center on the cover. This was the first time a soccer player was on the cover for the magazine, as they would highlight the club. There was a number of firsts happening for the league and indeed the sport. The Adams Championship win in 1973 was the first time any American expansion sports team won a title in their first year. Averaging 11,500 fans a game, this was also the first time any soccer team in America averaged over 10,000 fans since 1967. Despite Sports Illustrated predicting continued success for the Adams, the Philly-based team would dissolve in 1976. The rest of the league, however, was looking real good and the future was bright. 4 teams in 1974 would average over 10,000 in attendance, and that year's final between the LA Aztecs and the Miami Toros would be broadcast on CBS for the first national broadcast since 1968. 1974 and 75 would be major expansion years for the NASL, as they would add 8 new teams in 1974 to replace the 2 existing teams that would fold that year. With a focus on the West Coast, namely Seattle, Vancouver, and San Jose, the next year would see 5 more teams join, including ASL Division II teams, Chicago and Hartford, as by this point the ASL was a national and viable competitor to the NASL. 2 major international talents would join this league this year as well, including Portugal's Eusebio to Boston and English keeper Peter Bonetti to St. Louis. This, with the pending arrival of a specific Brazilian that we have yet to even mention really in depth in this story, it just kind of keeps reminding me, how did we fuck this up? How did the NASL fuck this up so badly that with all the star power, with this like potential building, how did we go wrong? So between 1973 and 1975, the league would go from 9 to 20 teams in the NASL in just a couple years. But it would be one man who would go on to change the league and arguably the future of the sports in this country in general. On June 10th, 1975, at the 21 Club on West 52nd Street in New York City, one of the greatest players to grace a pitch would sign a contract with one of the league's newest clubs. The New York Cosmos have finalized the signing of Pele. One of history's greatest players had arrived, and the effect was immediate. Every single move was highlighted and watched and put under a microscope and scrutinized and dissected by anybody and everybody. This only meant good things for business, as all of a sudden everybody was interested in what this league was doing. 10 million people would go on to watch national broadcast of his debut match on June 15, 1975, against the Dallas Tornado. In 1976, ABC would sign a contract to broadcast the matches for that season's games, and all but confirmed that the NASL had gone mainstream. With newspaper sports sections covering games and NASL games shown on syndicated TV service in 1978 and 77, all spearheaded by Pele and the Cosmos, drawing in 40,000 fans a game at their peak. In 1978, at Giant Stadium in New Jersey, it seemed like everything had finally come to fruition and the league was secure. A sold-out crowd of 73,000 plus was watching Pele lead the New York Cosmos over the Tampa Bay Rowdies 3-1 in what was dubbed the Soccer Bowl. However, shortly after this game was when the cracks started forming the foundation, and what was once sunny skies and a bright future started to see some clouds on the horizon. While many know the story of Pele in New York, he was far from the only major name who would go on to play in the NASL. And it was this aggressive over-expansion from the league, in spite of positive reactions at first, that would actually prove to be the beginning of the end for a once promising league. In 1976, Los Angeles Aztecs signed Manchester United star George Best to play the West Coast foil to the New York and Pele, provide more star power to the league, and continue the traditional East-West rivalry that exists in America for some reason. Just a couple of years later, Best would be traded to Miami-based team Fort Lauderdale Strikers in 1978, and just 1 year later, Los Angeles would replace Best with a certain Johan Cruyff, which instantly doubled attendance for Aztecs and as he won MVP of the league that year. LA wouldn't just sign big names from on-field as well, as they would have Reynos Michels, their manager from 1979 and 1980. Total Football had arrived in Southern California. As big names would continue to move and be signed by clubs, a real issue was beginning to pop up, as by 1977, multiple teams were believed to need relocation, be bought out, or just fold outright. A committee of owners would begin meeting and try to stop the bleeding, but despite the recommendation of limiting expansion to 2 new clubs the following year, the NASL would continue to bring in 6 new teams in 1978, increasing the total to 24 clubs. A major issue arising was that the teams felt like they all needed to have their own Pele, as many of the clubs like the original Portland Timbers would triple their payroll from 1979 to 1978 just to try and keep up with the over-reliance on foreign names, and this was actually hurting the league in a major sense more than it would help them in the long term. One of the things I mentioned in the first part of this series was how many Americans viewed soccer as a foreign sport due to all the outside influence that came from England, South America, and stuff like that, right? This focus on foreign players and putting them on the marquee only reinforced that narrative around the country and further caused a rift in those die-hard fans that only want to watch good old American sports like baseball and, the NFL, shit like that. Despite the league's attempt to change their image to a more homegrown focused league by increasing how many North American players had to start and be on the team, as well as adding a college draft to try and develop homegrown stars, the NASL and soccer in America just could not shake off this feeling of a foreign game. This, compounded by pressure from FIFA, as many of the rule changes were not sanctioned by the organization, many players faced international bans as a result and could not even play an international game if they decided to go to the NASL. The writing was on the wall for the NASL in the early 1980s, and as the economy would slip into a recession, many teams were still spending around 70% of their budgets on player salaries. And many of those teams simply just could not keep that spending up. The league as a whole was running at a deficit, and in 1980, it would be about $30 million or $93.1 million today. This, combined with a surprisingly popular indoor league beginning to sign many U.S. players, the NASL was on the ropes. Many of the league's expansion owners were not properly vetted, and when the league lost another $30 million in the following season, many of the owners simply began to fold or just sell it and back out of the league entirely, shrinking the league to 14 teams by 1981. Bill Woosnam was the NASL commissioner in all this, and it seemed the rest of the league felt it was time for change, as he would be voted out of his position by league owners in an 11-3 vote. However, the knockout blow would shortly come, as the decision by FIFA to deny their bid for the World Cup in 1986, reductions in salaries and roster size, left the struggling league out for the count. Only 9 teams will return in 1984, and 2 would commit for 1985. NASL would suspend operations, planning a return in 1986 that just simply never happened. It's really hard to say if only one moment can be blamed for the fall of this league, or if it was just really a combination of all their mistakes, the greed, overexpansion, and lack of common sense, if we're being honest. Despite all that, the impact of the league does live on today in many ways, as NCAA and the college game does use many of their rules, including shortened halves. However, the successor to the NASL would learn a lot, and moving forward would even take some of the rules into this early iteration of a new league coming up. This, combined with some of the most recognizable franchises in the MLS today originally being NASL members, it's not really a stretch to say that they set the foundation for what we have today and what we have to look forward to. Would we have Messi in the MLS without Pele? Who knows?